Okay, this is the last FRQ for Unit 2 that we're covering right now. Question 3. This was a question 6 on the original AP exam. Remember, that means it's an investigative question. What that means is they're going to give you something that's a little bit different from what you've seen before, but they're going to kind of walk you through the steps to help you understand it and solve it. These questions typically take longer, about 25 minutes. Not sure in 2020 what exactly that's going to look like because they haven't released that information as of the time I'm making the video. Maybe by the time you see the video, you'll have more information about that. But it's just to test how well you can think about statistics, even if it's not necessarily something you've been taught before. This was a fairly easy question 6, so if we get one like this, we should be pretty good to go. So for this one, we're looking at a scatter plot. A newspaper claims that the more semesters needed to complete an academic program at the university, the greater the starting salary in the first year of a job. So here we're looking at number of semesters and starting salary. We can see there's definitely a positive relationship between these points. Only a moderate relationship, but definitely positive. So the more semesters needed to complete an academic program, it does appear that the greater the starting salary. So it does appear if you spend more semesters that you get a greater starting salary. So does the scatter plot support the claim? It does support the claim because the points display an overall positive pattern. As number of semesters increases, starting salary tends to, I don't know why I wrote increase. I obviously knew it was increasing. This is why we check our work. We always read back over our answers at the end to make sure we didn't write anything silly like decrease instead of increase. And then they wrote, the scatter plot supports the newspaper report about number of semesters needed to complete an academic program and starting salary because it shows a positive association between the two variables. So I described what positive was. They just said positive, but you never know how much or little you can get away with. Some of you might have said no because correlation does not imply causation. You're correct, but they didn't imply causation in their statement. So they said the more semesters needed to complete an academic program, the greater the starting salary. That's true. We are seeing a positive relationship between those two variables. If they said that spending more semesters causes you to have a greater starting salary, that would be potentially incorrect because there could be a confounding variable or a lurking variable, which we will see on Part C. But the way they've worded it, they didn't imply causation. They just implied a relationship. And there definitely appears to be a relationship between these two variables. And it definitely appears to be positive. So let's see what they say. Essentially correct if you have, how's section 1 scored? So this is scored in 3 sections. Section 1 consists of parts A and B. So let's look at part B before we look at our scoring guideline. So part B is asking you to interpret the slope. Again, that's change in Y over change in X. When the number of semesters it took to graduate increases by 1 semester, the predicted starting salary increases by 1.1594 thousand euros. Make sure you're indicating the units. You don't just say euros, although I think they didn't take off for that if I remember correctly. So section 1 is scored as follows. So remember, A and B are scored together. Part A, the response addresses the positive association. Overall positive pattern. The response uses the positive association to justify the scatter plot supports the claim. In part B, the response correctly identifies the numerical value of the slope. In part B, the response interprets the slope as the change in starting salary for each additional semester. So increases by 1 semester, that's how much it increases by. So I have that. In part B, the interpretation of slope includes non-deterministic language, such as predicted or on average, one of those for a modifier, or non-deterministic language, as they call it. So I have that. So I had all 5 components. So I'll have essentially correct. I did say something wrong here, actually, so I probably would go down to a partially correct. Unfortunately, for a very small mistake. That's why you always want to check your work before you continue. So partially correct is 3 of the 5 or 4 of the 5. So they were a little bit nice here. You could miss 2 things and still get a partially correct. But less than that would be incorrect. So for example, if you completely bombed this part up here, but your interpretation of your slope was perfect, you would have gotten a partially correct. So don't freak out if you get 1 wrong answer. There's still hope to get some partial credit. Okay, let's look at part C. Let's check. Section 1 consists of part E. Section 2 consists of C and D. So C and D are also scored together. So based on the people in the sample, describe the association. I'll put their answers over here so you can see those as well. For only business. So only business, if you look at the graph, that's this section right here. So I'm only looking at these points. Now when we separate the points, you can see a very different pattern. So instead of it being moderate, now there's a strong, and instead of being positive, now it's negative. So there's a strong negative linear association between number of semesters it took to graduate and starting salary for business majors. And then for part D, based on the people in the sample, compare the median starting values. Make sure whenever you compare, you can give the numbers, but you also need to state which one is the highest and which one is the lowest. Don't just give the numbers, you have to actually compare them, and that's true for all of these sorts of things. So what I said, the median starting salary for business majors is the smallest at approximately 37,000 euros. The median for physics majors is the middle at approximately 49,000 euros. The median for chemistry is the greatest at approximately 55,000 euros. Let's look at the scoring for section 2. So part C, it states the association is negative. I did that. It states the association is strong or linear or both. I did both. Typically you need all 3 of those. They were nice here and they let you miss either strong or linear, but you should have all 3 because you don't know how nice they're going to be on your specific question. But the main thing they wanted was negative. That's why they were nice right there. In part C, the response refers to both variables in context. So I did both variables. I took number of semesters and starting salary. So I have both variables in context. So I have 3 out of the 5 so far. It's a good sign. In part D, the response correctly compares the 3 majors. So I did. I said smallest, middle, and greatest. So I'm comparing the 3. The response provides reasonable values. So I believe those values are reasonable. Let's see what they said the numbers were. They said 38,000. I said 37,000, pretty close. They said 48. I said 49, close enough. And then we both said 55. So if you have numbers close to these numbers, you should be fine. Which I did. So I had 3 out of 3 here. I had 2 out of 2 here. So it's going to give me an essentially correct. I bet they did the same thing on this one. Yes, 3 or 4 out of 5 was a partially correct. And then the last part, part E, this is scored as 1 question right here. So here's what I wrote. Let's put it side by side with what they wrote. It should say that majors that tend to take longer to complete typically have higher starting salaries, but people who take longer to complete their major compared to other people in that major tend to have lower starting salaries compared to other people of that major. So kind of wordy, but I didn't want to miss anything. They said the newspaper report should be modified to account for major. Overall, majors that take longer to complete tend to have higher starting salaries, with chemistry the highest, physics the next highest, and business the lowest. However, within a major, students who take a greater number of semesters tend to have lower starting salaries. So very similar. Perhaps theirs was a little more eloquent, but that doesn't make mine wrong. Well, let's make sure. Let's look at our scoring guideline. Section 3, essentially correct if the response states that there's a negative association for each of the majors. It should. But people who take longer to complete their major compared to other people in that major tend to have lower starting salaries. I think I said that. Not quite the way they worded it, but I think I said that. And the response notes the overall positive association. I think I have both of those. So note that a response that states the original report was wrong or incorrect or should be retracted cannot satisfy the requirement to note the overall positive association. Yeah, I think I have both of those. You can use your judgment to see if you agree with me and if you yourself have all those parts. So all 3 essentially correct is a 4 out of 4. Oh, they were nicer with the partially, or 3 out of 4 here. You could have 2 E's and a P. If section 1 and 2 are partially correct and section 3 is essentially correct, that's a 3 out of 4. So read this one carefully. 1 and 3 essentially correct and section 2 incorrect is a 3 out of 4. Section 2 and 3 essentially correct and section 1 incorrect was also a 3 out of 4. So here you can tell they're valuing section 3. So if you get section 3 essentially correct and you got 1 and 2 partial or 1 or 2 essential, 1 or 2 incorrect. So you either could have gotten them both partial or one of them could be incorrect. They were a little bit nice. Yeah, I started rambling there. Just read it and see what it says. I'll let you read the rest because you're going to need to read the words. It's going to get confusing to hear me talk about it. So take a minute to read through that. Pause the video now if you need to figure out what your score is. Hopefully you enjoyed watching the videos to do the scoring instead of just reading the scoring guideline. Hopefully I go into more detail and it's easier to get through than reading all of the words on your own. Email your teacher or come to office hours if you have any questions.